Looking for paradise. The Iberian lynx, one of the most threatened animal species on the face of the earth. This impressive feline is a specialist predator, which as it evolved, adapted to take advantage of a food source that was very abundant in the Mediterranean scrubland. In recent times, the populations of Iberian rabbits have been decimated in the lynx's habitats, which has aggravated the feline situation. The loss of its main food source, together with the loss of habitat and the proliferation of human activities, has left the lynx in a critical situation. Today, the lynx is found only in the Sierra Morena mountain range and in Doñana National Park. Their populations are fragmented over a large geographical area full of obstacles and dangers. The isolation and scarcity of specimens can cause an increase in inbreeding and put the survival of the species even more at risk. This situation makes the need to intervene urgent. It may be necessary to move some of the animals, not only among the existing populations, but also to new territories that meet their needs. To that end, lynxes are also being raised in captivity. Great efforts and investments are being made to raise cubs that can be freed in areas with an appropriate habitat and enough rabbits to guarantee their survival. These actions are only valid as emergency solutions, but we need to know how we can encourage natural movements, the connections among the populations, and their expansion into new areas. The team of Dr. Eloy Revilla is studying the movements of the lynxes and their behavior when they spread out over a territory. It's a question of seeing the landscape with the lynx's eyes, of interpreting their needs and requirements. To do that, for more than 20 years, the researchers have followed 30 lynxes marked with tracking collars that have spread over the territory. Their movements, recorded with this procedure, can be interpreted in relation to the characteristics of the terrain, and models can be drawn up to help us understand the patterns of their movements. In these years of study, the researchers have obtained surprising results. Although lynxes normally don't stray from their little fragmented populations, when an animal was released far from its habitual area, it returned to its place of origin, crossing highways, freeways, and even railways with security fences. Long journeys represent big risks, and the animals aren't normally willing to run those risks. Although lynxes are able to overcome big obstacles if they have to, in practice, the populations will only make contact if there are corridors with the right kinds of habitats and ecological conditions. Thanks to the models they have developed, the researchers have been able to see that the type of habitat is decisive for the lynx to spread, and that this doesn't happen merely according to the distance, as was hypothesized up to now. Just as with humans and many other species, young lynxes take greater risks than the adults, venturing into open areas, especially at night, although there can be no doubt that their preferred habitat is Mediterranean scrubland. The success of their adventure to eventually establish themselves in new territories depends on the habitat they must cross, but also on a multitude of unpredictable factors. In fact, it is a stage in their lives when many are killed in accidents. There is much we have yet to learn about the Iberian lynx. Its behavior is truly fascinating, but what's more, it's the key to continuing the work to manage to save it from extinction. Journey to discovery. Every year, thousands of black kites cross back over the Strait of Gibraltar to reach their breeding grounds on the Iberian Peninsula. This is no ordinary bird. Its opportunistic nature and its impressive ability to adapt have made it the most widely distributed bird of prey in the world, found throughout Europe, Asia, Africa, and Oceania. Dr. Fabrizio Sergio, a member of the group directed by Fernando Hiraldo at the Doñana Biological Station, studies kites in one of their main European breeding habitats. For more than 30 years, kites have been banded in Doñana. This intense monitoring has allowed researchers to get a close-up look at their biology and behavior. The youngest birds are the most vulnerable. In the first year of life, 60% of those that hatch will die. Between 7 and 11 years of age, they reach full size and enjoy their greatest reproductive potential. For a pair of kites, having a nest in favorable territory with an abundance of prey is a guarantee that their young will be able to develop completely. Competition for territory is intense, and the birds who have access to the best areas are those who remain physically robust as they age. Researchers have found that the kites return year after year to the same territories. In fact, they have even been known to reuse the same nest for more than 20 years. Dr. Sergio uses a microcamera on the end of a long pole to check out the contents of nests without having to physically climb the tree. Females generally lay 2 to 3 eggs at a time, which they then incubate for about a month. Normally, it is only possible to obtain enough food to feed one of these chicks, although there have been cases of 3 surviving young among skilled adults living in territories with abundant prey. On the shores of the salt marshes of Doñana, an astoundingly biodiverse ecosystem has developed, the aviary. A line of cork oak trees is home to nests belonging to herons, spoonbills, and other ardeidas. This is where the kites come each morning in search of prey. Researchers have discovered that inundation levels on the salt marshes following spring rains are directly related to the proportion of chicks that will survive each year. After nearly 50 days, the young kite is ready to leave the nest, and soon thereafter, he will travel to Africa just like his parents. Up until very recently, the bird's journey through African territory was something of a mystery. But now, Dr. Sergio and his team use sophisticated techniques for following the kites year-round, even on their long trip. First, they must capture the birds using carrion as bait and a net that is activated from a distance. Once the biometric data has been gathered, they are outfitted with a GPS satellite transmitter. For several years, they are able to detect the position of each bird at all times, within just a few meters. This team has already used the system to mark more than 100 birds. Thanks to their methods, they are aware of the location of migrating birds in Africa and all the details of their journey, including the very tree where they will nest upon their return in the spring. Never before has such a large group of raptors been followed so meticulously. The youngest birds begin their migration back to Spain a bit later, so they have access only to the less desirable areas and aren't able to reproduce as a result. This is despite the fact that they are physically able to do so, as proven by Dr. Julio Blas, another member of the team. Only the most experienced and a few more gifted young birds are able to begin the return earlier and ensure the best nesting sites. Some individuals become veritable experts, continuing to reproduce beyond 24 years of age. When it comes to quality, individual variability is quite important, and the most competent birds clearly stand out. Those who will almost certainly produce the most offspring. These young will be able to inherit their parents' qualities and ensure continued success. Kings of the Meadow. Monfragüe National Park is home to one of the most impressive and well-preserved sanctuaries of Mediterranean forest. On these mountains and hillsides covered in dense vegetation, one of Europe's most emblematic carrion-eating birds makes its home, the black vulture. This natural landscape is the ideal spot for nurturing one of the world's healthiest populations of this bird. Black vultures prefer to nest in majestic trees from native Mediterranean forests, such as the cork oak. They also choose spots high up on craggy cliffs which cannot be easily accessed by land predators. It must be said that one of the keys to the existence of the black vultures of Monfragüe is located in large part outside of the park. Although they nest here, their feeding grounds are found in another area entirely. What are the sources of food that keep this thriving population alive? Emilio Castillo, a researcher from the University of Extremadura and member of the team led by Dr. Juan Manuel Sánchez Guzmán, has analyzed their feeding preferences. Black vultures avail themselves of carrion from small and medium-sized mammals in a wide variety of sizes, ranging from rabbits to deer. Areas where vegetation is not as dense make it easier for them to locate carcasses from the air. They live close to the more abundant griffon vultures and often eat alongside them. In spite of being physically larger, black vultures prefer to avoid the noisy struggles that often occur when feeding on carrion. The spectacular black vultures are more apt to wait for the right moment to assert their rights. In order to track their flight, they are outfitted with radio transmitters. Dr. Emilio Castillo marked several birds in Extremadura. The team led by Dr. José Antonio Donaza from the Doñana Biological Station has also carried out a study with vultures that have been marked with these transmitters, this time to the north of Huelva and in southern Extremadura. Both studies revealed that in the period of one day, an individual is capable of flying up to 80 kilometers. Even when they are busy nesting and must return to the nest after every flight, the area they cover extends for a radius of dozens of kilometers. These studies show that extensive, well-preserved meadows are of utmost importance to black vultures. Researchers have also discovered that some meadows are of more importance than others. Several years ago, the black vulture's diet consisted largely of rabbits. Recently, however, owing to decreasing rabbit populations, the main carrion meats consumed by vultures are sheep, sometimes complemented by deer and wild boar. The behavior of vultures when searching for food from the air, as well as the types of prey they are able to eat, explain why meadowlands are so important to these birds. The population at Monfragüe is what it is thanks to the vast expanse of meadows in Extremadura, which are still used for traditional purposes. They are also located at a distance which is easy for the vultures to reach from their breeding grounds. The future of carrion-eating birds as emblematic as the black vulture depends on the conservation of the traditional use of large areas outside the limits of protected lands. Courting. The grain-filled flatlands of Extremadura are home to a large portion of the world's great bustards. This bird holds the world record for heaviest flying animal. Males, who are much larger than females, can reach up to 1 meter high and come close to weighing 20 kilograms. In the spring, these huge males strut about in front of their rivals, imposing their hierarchical standing and their corresponding reproductive rights. Still, in order to mate, they must attract the females that are spread out over vast expanses of territory. In order to do so, they arrange themselves in specific areas with special characteristics known as leks. These protected areas are free of predators and human interference, and are visible from great distances on the flatlands. Frequently, groups of males form, so as to more effectively attract females. Like the majority of steppe birds, great bustards present cryptic coloring that keeps them camouflaged in their environment. Still, when males want to be seen, they are able to change into attention-grabbing white balls that stand out like floodlights on the grassy flats. The male great bustard twists his wings and tail, revealing the white feathers that are normally covered by others of a drab brown color. A recent study by Dr. Javier Viñuela revealed that during the display, males turn and take their stance depending on the position of the sun, thus ensuring that their signals reach the females with the best lighting possible. The males also boast a full range of sexual characteristics that they use in these displays, including the chestnut-colored gular sac and the neck bristles, fine long feathers that extend from either side of the beak. Dr. Sebastián Hidalgo de Trucios and his collaborators have studied the great bustards in Extremadura for nearly 2 decades. Although it might be said that males work together to attract females to the leks, once the females arrive, it is clear that the males are nothing more than dedicated adversaries competing to reproduce. The spectacular displays and competitive rivalry require significant amounts of energy and the taking of important risks that not all males are prepared or able to assume. Putting on an impressive display can make them even easier for predators to spot. While following a group of males for an entire year in controlled conditions, researchers discovered that only those who were most physically fit developed sexual characteristics and dared to enter the reproductive game that year. For this reason, those who were better prepared increased their body weight by about 30% in early spring. They then began to molt and to behave like males seeking to reproduce. After taking measurements of some of these sexual structures, the group observed that the size of the gular sac was directly related to the male's physical condition and dominance, while the length of the neck bristles corresponded to its age. These characteristics say much about the bird's rank to both rivals and females. In keeping with the unspoken rules of the mating system, all male great bustards who display in the center ring must first pass a preliminary aptitude test. But there is yet another test to come, winning over females who are free to choose from a variety of suitors. Once the choice has been made, the female retires once more to one of the many hidden corners on the plains, where she will raise this year's chicks on her own. The conservation of the great bustard means the conservation of habitats, but not only for the feeding and raising of young. There must also be leks, free from human interference, where the displays can take place. Displays that maintain the most genuine characteristics of these flatland birds. Captives of the forest. In the cold springtime nights on the peaks of Cantabria, it is more and more difficult to hear the song of the forest's great cock. The Cantabrian capercaillie, an animal that is a symbol of the Iberian Peninsula, is disappearing. The Cantabrian capercaillie, an animal that is a symbol of the Iberian In the traditional spots called leks, where males gather to put on courtship displays and attract females, all is silent. Meanwhile, great efforts are being made to try and save this large grouse. As an emergency measure, a breeding project is in development. The first Cantabrian capercaillie eggs to be incubated in captivity are being cared for in this center in the Principality of Asturias. Inside, a tiny heart beats as it faces an uncertain future. But the conservation of this great cock is not possible solely through captive breeding. We must also become aware of the factors that are provoking a decline in natural populations and then strive to correct them. Doctors María José Bañuelos and Mario Quevedo of the University of Oviedo study the habitat characteristics of the capercaillie. They use powerful geographic informational systems to try and pinpoint the conditions that determine whether a habitat is appropriate or not. It's not necessary to capture or even bother these birds in order to obtain valuable information on their behavior. Feathers found on the forest floor contain DNA that makes it possible to confirm which specific individual, male or female, has been here. By studying the bird's droppings, researchers are also able to recognize each individual, and what's more, they can also analyze its diet. This allows them to learn not only which individual is at hand, but its dietary preferences as well. To date, researchers have discovered that the Cantabrian capercaillie spends more time on the forest floor than its European cousins. In early spring, their diet is based on beech tree sprouts, and later they focus on blueberries, holly, and various species of herb. In winter, they have been known to eat ferns. During the mating season, males make use of specific areas called leks. These are spots that are recognized for playing a key role in the conservation process. It is here that the showy mating dance takes place. Meanwhile, females use nearby areas to bring up their chicks. These distinct habitats provide them with ample food and shelter. As far as the males, after breeding they depart for other zones, which often share a common border with the leks. In the past few years, forest areas have become more and more fragmented. This makes it difficult for birds from different habitats to make the connections they need, and could compromise the viability of their populations. Researchers have analyzed the locations of both older and current leks as related to human activity in the forest. This has made it possible for them to study changes in the use of space over the years, and to evaluate the importance of these habitats over longer periods of time. It has been observed how the presence of paths, trails, and other types of infrastructure, as well as livestock, negatively affects the capercaillie. In fact, in the past few years, the birds have tended to occupy areas that are higher up on the mountainside, pushed there by the growing impact of human activity. The capercaillie is fairly philopatric, which is to say that they tend to remain in areas that were once beneficial to them, even when they no longer are, owing to changes brought on by human activity. These zones can act as traps for females attempting to nest there. They are normally unsuccessful in their efforts. Using these models, protected areas can be established. It is even possible to attempt to predict where the next local extinctions are likely to occur. The conservation of the capercaillie requires the protection not only of the most emblematic forests and of breeding grounds, but also of all habitats that allow the birds to meet their needs throughout the year. In other words, the conservation of complete natural ecosystems. Pollen in the fossil record indicates that these forests have remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years, and that these birds were fully adapted to their surroundings long before humans became involved. For this reason, it is particularly important to conserve forests in their original state, untouched by humans, as their future is inexorably linked to the survival of the great cock of the forest. Seasonal hermits. In massifs made of limestone, thousands of years of erosion by water activity have created a subterranean world. Caves are a special habitat to which very few animals manage to adapt. There are no plants here, as complete darkness makes photosynthesis impossible. This is a kingdom ruled by silence, broken only by the sound of water, that forms this underground landscape drop by drop. In the Sierra Arana region in Granada, we find the Cueva del Agua, which held the record for many years as the deepest cave in Spain. Here there are several animals that do not inhabit any other spot, like this small pseudoscorpion the size of a mosquito. This blind millipede, devoid of all pigmentation, is also endemic to this cave. Other animals use the cave to hibernate or take shelter in the coldest months, like these nocturnal butterflies and also these caddisflies, which have much in common with the ancestors of butterflies. Their Spanish name, tricóptero, translates as fuzzy wings. These fine hairs have evolved into the scales that cover the wings of butterflies. Caddisflies from the species Mesophylax aspersus have adapted to life in seasonal streams. They survive the hot, dry summer inside the cave, where they enter a dormant state until autumn. The temperature and humidity are constant inside the cave year-round, 9 degrees Celsius and 100% relative humidity. So how do these insects know when it is time for them to leave the cave? Dr. Carmen Zamora and her team from the University of Granada are studying the behavior of the cave-dwelling caddisfly. Locating the insects inside the Cueva del Agua requires a painstaking search of the cave. November is mating season. Afterward, the females leave the cave to lay their eggs on the banks of a river. Once the egg sac is covered by water, small aquatic larvae emerge and build themselves protective casings out of rock fragments that they will slowly enlarge as they grow. After metamorphosis is complete, adults must enter the cave until summer is over. It is still unknown how they are able to find the cave's small entrance, which is more than 13 kilometers away from the river at an altitude of nearly 2,000 meters above sea level. After spending several months inside the cave, they return to these activities in the fall to complete a new life cycle. In order to confirm the factors that make the Mesophylax come out of its dormant state, researchers weighed and measured the insects in spring and in fall and kept track of environmental data inside the cave. When they analyzed temperatures both outside and inside the cave, they discovered something quite interesting. Every year, the awakening of the caddisflies takes place exactly 1 week after the inversion of the temperature gradient. That is to say, when exterior temperatures drop, the air inside the cave, which is less dense, tends to blow out of the cave and renew itself. The resulting air current is a sign felt by the insects that tells them it is time to awaken from their dormant state, time to mate and complete a new life cycle. Caves are a special habitat in short supply, which are very fragile. Extremely stable in their environmental variables, the animals who live in caves have adapted by being very sensitive to small variations that keep them informed as to fundamental changes in their life cycles. For this reason, subtle variations caused by human activity can have a much greater impact inside caves than they do outside. Whether caves will continue to abound with life depends on the conservation of stable conditions within. Microstrategists. Malaria is one of the harshest pandemics to hit humankind. The struggle against this illness is a battle that began long ago and whose end is still not in sight. Birds also suffer from a type of malaria similar to ours, but which cannot be transmitted to humans. Because they are simple to study in natural conditions and many aspects can easily be controlled, birds are ideal models for malaria research. The infection is brought on by the bite of mosquitoes that transmit the parasite to the host. When a fresh mosquito bites an infected animal, it ingests blood with parasites that are fully developed. These multiply within the mosquito's system, starting the cycle anew. Dr. Santiago Merino of the Spanish Council for Scientific Research studies malaria in the blue tit, a small bird that frequently reproduces using nest boxes. An adhesive plate located on the roof of the nest box traps mosquitoes that then infect the birds with a strain of malaria that is not dangerous to humans. When the chicks are 3 days old, researchers capture the adults and take the first round of data. After making note of their general state and their weight, they take a small sample of blood, which they use to determine the presence of illness. A microchip is placed on the bird's leg, which will enable the researchers to measure efforts made to bring food to the nest. In addition, one group was injected with a treatment against the parasite. A sensor placed in the entrance to the nest box keeps track of the bird's comings and goings. 10 days later, the researchers take stock again, evaluating the effectiveness of the treatment and checking to see how the chicks are developing. The medication lowers the number of parasites in the body of the blue tit. This reduction has been seen to increase the reproductive success of the females. When compared to the control group, these females enable more fledglings to leave the nest, lose less weight while raising their young, and have higher survival rates. It is in the blue tit's interest to fight the parasites, while it is in the parasite's interest to utilize the bird's body as a platform for spreading to other hosts. The birds use their immune system to fight the parasites. One interesting way of doing this is to provoke competition between the parasites themselves. Among birds with stronger immune systems, it has been observed that there is sometimes more than one parasite within the same blood cell. For some reason, these multi-parasitic cells do not generally survive, putting an end to the parasites carried by the birds. This leads experts to believe that this is a defensive strategy used by the host. As for the parasites, they respond with other strategies. Their main goal is the spread to other birds, infecting them as well. To this end, more females than males are generally produced inside the host, as just a few males are capable of fertilizing many females, making the reproduction process more efficient. Mating occurs in the digestive tract of the mosquito that has ingested a sample of blood after biting an infected host. Within this blood sample are thousands of parasites, but just a few male parasites is enough to fertilize all of the females. Nevertheless, when there are not many parasites inside the host, due to medication or because of the bird's immune system, it sometimes happens that in the drop of blood ingested by the mosquito, there are very few parasites, none of which are male. Dr. Merino has discovered that in these cases, the parasite alters the proportion of sexes, thus increasing the number of males so that at least one will come into contact with the females in the blood ingested by the mosquito. Between blue tits and protozoa, a coevolution process is taking place, so that when attacked by the bird's immune system, the parasites are able to alter the proportion of sexes in order to ensure reproduction and transmission to other hosts. For our own struggle against these microstrategists, it is of utmost importance to become familiar with their tactics. Discoveries about the behavior of the parasites that cause malaria and their hosts lead to new clues on how to combat this grave illness. Birds with personality. In the late 1980s, experts on animal behavior began to notice that animals have a personality, meaning that individuals show consistent behavioral differences. They observed that given animals which are more easily startled or more aggressive tend to exhibit that behavior in different situations and contexts. The behavior of different individuals, then, shows a degree of flexibility. On the other hand, the various personality types that make up a group or population will determine how much variability is available when facing situations that are different, new, or unpredictable. The study of animal personality is especially interesting in endangered species. Such is the case with the northern bald ibis. Only 300 of these curious birds remain, living in northern Africa. When a species reaches this point, there is no alternative than the one we are able to offer through captive breeding. After many trying years, in the most positive cases, we'll have a small group that will be charged with giving rise to future populations. Ideally, the founders should have personalities that are as varied as possible. There should be aggressive individuals that will do better in situations where competition is fierce, and others that are not as aggressive, that will thrive in situations where there is not much competition. Timid birds will find more success in high-risk situations, while daring birds will do better in low-risk situations. Researchers Tomás Redondo and Eduardo Aguilera from the Spanish Council for Scientific Research are studying the personality of the northern bald ibis being bred at a center funded by the government of Andalusia in Cádiz. They carry out interesting experiments with the birds, like a test that measures immobility tendencies. The eyes of each animal are covered, and they are placed face up for several seconds. The amount of time they remain still depends on the character of each individual. Other experiments reveal data related to reactions when faced with new situations. Each animal is placed inside a box. A trap door is then opened, and a conflict is created. A tray with food is revealed, which is being watched over by a doll that the animal has never seen before. Some individuals behave timidly, while others don't seem to fear the patient observer. Using different stimuli, researchers try to uncover the personality of each ibis. Some were brought up by humans, while others were raised in captivity by their own parents. The latter group displays a wider variety of personalities and what appears to be a higher rate of survival. Researchers also obtained some very interesting results when they followed a series of individuals after being set free in the wild. Some took off, eventually establishing themselves hundreds of kilometers away, while others stayed in the spot where they were born. The birds that spread out had different personality traits than those who didn't. They were more prone to flee when faced with danger, and were also more willing to explore new situations. Like all animals, birds must make important decisions throughout their lives. Experts in animal behavior are just beginning to understand what those decisions are based on. The study of animal personality is fundamental for understanding their behavior, and in the future, it will be vital as plans are made to save endangered species. low-stress diet. For thousands of years, horses have evolved in steppe regions, trusting in their ability to remain alert. Evolution has selected those individuals that have managed to avoid attacks from the predators attempting to take them by surprise. Horses have a radius of sight that is practically 360 degrees, and although they are able to make out fewer colors than we are, they have a much higher capacity for motion detection. Their auditory capacity is also much greater than ours. This acute sensorial capacity ensures that horses are able to flee quickly when danger approaches. But almost 50,000 years ago, one predator of horses began to establish a relationship with them that has continued to modern day, and that has changed the history of both species. They are no longer the driving force behind the army, or a main mode of transport, but they are the ideal companion for tourist outings, the star of passion-filled sports events, and an excellent tool for the physical and emotional development of children. They even provide a means for treating illnesses and handicaps. The possibilities for equine therapy are growing more popular by the day, and the results can be spectacular. The animals used for this purpose must be particularly calm and trustworthy. Generally speaking, the demand for calm animals is growing. But on occasion, the defense mechanisms of each species can create dangerous situations for the people who handle them. A horse that starts violently is a risk in any situation, not only when riding, but when grooming, transporting, or shoeing. Stress is an adaptive mechanism that is an effective defense against predators in a natural setting. But for an animal in captivity, being under continual stress can result in physical or psychological damage. Up to now, the only way of avoiding these continually stressful situations was through training and breaking. Recently, however, it has been suggested that diet may also influence a horse's stress level. Dr. Alberto Redondo of the University of Córdoba studies the behavior of horses and its relationship to diet. He fed 50 horses a standard diet containing 3% fat. After 2 months, he put all of the horses through a series of tests to evaluate their stress level and their response to an unexpected scare. He measured their heart rate variability at night, as well as bloodstream levels of cortisol, a hormone that measures stress. Flight response was measured using a tiger head model that popped up unexpectedly. This experiment was also carried out at night in order to rule out the influence of the animal's daytime activities. Later, he divided the horses into 2 random groups. He continued to feed half of them with the same diet. The other half ate a diet with the same amount of calories, but with 10% of vegetable fat. After 2 months, he put the horses through the same tests and observed that those with a fattier diet were more relaxed at rest. They were also slower to react to the tiger head, while the other group of horses continued to experience high levels of stress. In order to prove it was the fat that was responsible for the horses' lowered stress levels and reaction times, he swapped the diets being consumed by each group and then repeated the tests for a 3rd time after 2 months. At this point, the results were conclusive. Those who cut back on the fat recovered their higher stress levels at rest and were quicker to react to the predator model, while those with the 10% fat diet were observed to be more relaxed than ever. By simply adjusting diet, we can reduce the risk of accidents in the presence of horses. And not only this, by reducing their stress levels, we are also improving their well-being and their quality of life. This faithful companion deserves a concerted effort and dedication on our part to try and understand their way of thinking a little better each day. In this way, we will be able to return to them a small part of what these noble beasts have given us. Eat or be eaten. When we walk through the aisles of a supermarket, trying to find the food we wish to buy, our only sense of rush comes from thoughts of what we have to do afterward, or how long our shopping list seems to be. This experience would be quite different if we knew that at any moment a predator could jump out from behind the shelves. Our shopping trip would certainly be much faster, and we would only be concerned with the most essential products. Many animals are faced with this situation when looking for food. The continual experience with predators that are likely to take them by surprise makes them distrustful and causes them to dedicate the least amount of time to risky behavior. Clearly, being skittish means lowering their possibilities for finding food. But a lack of caution could mean that they end up being food for other animals. We can therefore expect that natural selection makes animals more or less skittish according to the real risk they run of being hunted. The three-spined stickleback is a small fish that lives in the continental waters of the Northern Hemisphere, and its search for food is anything but safe. Wading birds like herons wait patiently for the sticklebacks to move underwater before launching a well-aimed stab with their long, sharp beaks. Herons frequently attack these fish in lakes or calm pools of water. In rivers and streams, they are more difficult to capture. The ripples on the surface of the water make it difficult for them to see what is below and to measure their position before attacking. Dr. David Alvarez from the University of Oviedo posed the hypothesis that, even though they are from the same species, it is probable that the sticklebacks that live in pools are more fearful of herons than those living in rivers and streams. In order to prove his theory, he gathered fish from various rivers and also from a variety of pools to subject them to an experiment in his lab. He prepared an aquarium with plants so that the fish would have somewhere to hide. To one side, he placed a device that released small worms. When the fish moved to feed on them, a fake heron head sprang into action, simulating an attack. The researcher measured the time the fish took to calm down and begin feeding again. The differences were quite clear when comparing the pool fish and the river fish. The stillwater fish took longer than those from the river to return to feeding. They also ate more quickly. It's interesting that there were no differences between different stillwater groups or different river groups, only between groups from varying habitats. In other words, it seems that waters with calm surfaces produce fish that are more skittish because of how easy it is for herons to hunt them. Fear when faced with possible risks, or boldness in dangerous situations, are behavioral tendencies that define the personality of animals. Studies like the one using three-spined sticklebacks show that there are adaptational reasons behind these personality differences.